privilege escalation, the platform, master options in here. Particular option of search Floyd in Cali. So you can just type search Floyd and the name of the application that you want to find an exploit for. There is, in the industry like, ooh, I use Cali, I'm such a hacker. And there's a lot of backlash. And so I ask people, okay, what is the right, like type of distribution for you to use? What is the right type of distribution? Because that's the one that I like. So if you ask me what is the right type of distribution for pen testing, whatever you feel comfortable working with, right? Unless a client specifically tells you don't use that. Whatever it is that you feel comfortable working with and works for you or gives you the results that you want. Because, like it just works well for me. But for example, my brother is just getting started with an InfoSec and he told me something that made me think, rather than going for Cali, I'm just going to switch the pen testing framework that I could use on DVM, because rather than downloading something and getting an extra, I'm the kind of person that try to add that capability to what I already have. Makes me think, I guess. Exploit Suggester. So Exploit Suggester is designed with the purpose of detecting security deficiencies for a given Linux kernel. It provides the following functionality: assessing kernel exposure on publicly known exploits. Tools assessing kernel on every publicly known Linux kernel exploit. And very hardening security measures. So it can check for most security settings available in your Linux kernel, and it verifies not only the kernel compile time configurations, but also verifies runtime settings, giving a more complete picture of security posture. Here's the interesting part: known Linux kernel exploit. So it has to be something that has already been, like documented. So if your exploit suggester is really not, like up to date, or it's not something that, like qualities or all the exploits documented and listed, then it might not be any good. Like I said before, do not rely just on third-party tools. You really have to have a good idea of what you're doing. So we're going to take a quick look of how the output will look like. So this is my terminal right now. So this is the results that it's given. Much. What potential exploits you could use. But yeah, just most of the patched, like they take a lot of, they might be really resource consuming. A good countermeasure against them, it's also, know that if you're in security operations, there's just so much that you can do. But, like just keep your eyes open for compilation tools. You do not want to keep compilation tools on, like on an end user's computer. Gonna go unhacked, but I mean, if you're gonna get hacked, make it harder on them. Just don't offer everything on a silver platter. And then So I have 3 rules: never roll out a change without testing it, never test in production, and always follow rule 1 and 2. So that's something my boss always said. Well, just getting started, and basically it boils down to don't do anything stupid. SUID files. SUID is a Linux feature that gives low-privileged users the ability to execute a file as the file owner. SUID stands for Set User ID. Owned by the root user, and the Set Uid bit said no matter who executed the file, it's always going to run with root user privileges. Find how we would find Set Uid files. And this is the one that I found. I'm gonna run it through, like the manual way with the exploit, with the smart enumerator. Linux smart enumerator is also going to list it, right? So this is something to keep in mind. How to find a Set Uid. Normally, Linux permissions are broken into 3 different, like groups like this. So as users are represented by an S, as in the execute position. User, group, and other. User is pretty much like the owner. I love this meme. So 444. I know that they say that if you have to explain a meme, it's no longer funny, but going back into the permissions, we have a 4 user, we have a 4 for the group, and we have a 4 for the other. Always equals only read permissions, and this is a reading only area. Oh well, just nerdy humor. I'm not a nerd though. We look for an existing exploit and write an existing binary with a reverse shell. In this case, there is an exploit for it. So this is the one that I ran. It's called xim appropriate permissions. I ran it, and here it is. I am root. BC Password is a plain text-based database that contains information for all user accounts on the system. It is owned by root and has 644 permissions by default. By root are users with suited privileges and readable by all system users. But only root can modify it. So what I did in here, if I wanted to exploit it, is what I did is created a hash in my local box. Why not? Because the format requires me to do so. A new line into the etc password file to create a new user. So this is what it looks like. I switched to my newly created user, and boom, I was root once again. Here with Linux, what you can do is put this double sign, it appends to the existing file. Appending just means you add it. And this is just going to basically write to it. As I was mentioning earlier, if a target is running a CMS system, it is recommended to look at the configuration files, as they can often contain sensitive information such as credentials. Not necessarily just credentials, but like I said, they can also be, for example, operating system versions or application versions, caches, usernames for other machines. Something very helpful. Cron Jobs. A cron job is a Linux utility used for scheduling tasks that can be executed at a specific time. This type of tasks run with the security level of the user who owns them. The configuration for cron jobs is stored in the cron tab, which is known as cron tabs. So if we browse directly to the cron tab directory, this is where we're looking. This is what we want vicious. This is always going to be in Linux. These last couple of lines are what caught my eye. Try, okay, where is this file? If I'm supposed to write to it, I gotta know where it is. And I found it. So what I did in here is completely wipe this file blank. Okay, just, I don't want anything on it. So I rewrote, like the starts of shell, and this line, I am writing my shell. This is my, like local host. This is the computer where I wanted to connect back to. Wanted to use. Okay. And the reason why I'm doing cat override .sh is because I want to make sure that everything that I wrote is in there, so I can see it in here. And then this is my listener, and I can see that since this is a cron task, determine amount of time, it started running and I got my root. Like reverse shell that you most commonly are going to use for them. Backups. Backups with permissions misconfigurations can contain sensitive information such as private keys. A private key is used to identify you to any server you're connecting to, so it must match the public key stored in the server's authorized keys for the account that you're trying to connect to. So you have to have a match to it, to your destination. Some common directories where backups should be found are temp, var, and root. This is what a private key would look like in a case like this. So we copy it and it's going to give us access. And here I'm just permissions. And trying to SSH to it, I'm giving the appropriate permissions in here of my victim host. I'm already root. So I'm just gonna try to show you guys this file. Looking into it, this is my private key. I wanted to give it any kind of, like random name, but I couldn't think of anything. So I was just like, yeah, see you. Boom, I'm root. So you want to be able to always look into your SSH folder, because if you have access to it, then it just means you have to do is to get the root key. Sources, privilege escalation cheat sheets. I know that this is just kind of tricky because it's recorded, but if y'all have any questions or anything that wasn't clear enough or anything that I could help you guys with, definitely reach out to me. I love memes. They're really funny. So yeah, again for joining me. And another thing I wanted to say to it's, like just thank you to the B-Sides group for making my presentation. I wanted to do this and I'm really excited. So yay. Awesome. Thanks.
So today we're going to talk about search order hijacking, or SOH. First, a little about me. I spent several years doing digital forensics and incident response consulting and moved from there to corporate and financial services, where I ran our security operations team for several years. I have been on Red Canary's detection engineering team since early in 2016, and I lead our CERT's internal training program for detection engineering. Now, we're not going to go very far into DLL search order itself, but I wanted to set out at least some basic information. DLLs are shared code libraries on Windows, and based on references within the binary, will get loaded into memory upon execution or as needed to perform that shared function. They can be leveraged by multiple processes. And aside from having each DLL's fully qualified path hard-coded into the binary or a manifest file, the system will search for DLLs following a preset order. And that preset order is where search order hijacking, or SOH, comes into play. If you know the name of a legitimate DLL that will be loaded by a legitimate and presumably trusted but not frequently executed binary, you can set up SOH by placing a copy of that binary along with a malicious DLL that has a legitimate name together in a path that you control, which is commonly under the user profile. Then, when that legitimate binary executes, the malicious DLL gets loaded into memory, thus running its code in the context of a trusted process. It kind of sounds confusing, but we'll show some real-world examples later, and it will make more sense then if it is confusing now. So why is SOH important? Well, every year, like many companies, we put out a threat report. This past year, SOH was in 8th place overall from an adversary technique perspective, and it impacted 16% of our customers. The numbers increased over the course of the year as we developed new ways to identify related activity. And as we continue to improve our detection, I expect that those numbers will also increase. It's not just about the usage, but about the visibility into that usage. Now, there will be a link to our report later in the prezo for those interested in the nitty-gritty details. And yes, with the rollout of MITRE's attack sub-techniques this summer, SOH is now 1574.001 instead of 1083, and there will be a link to that also, just to save you the searching around for it. Now, we see SOH applied by various adversaries, both commodity and advanced, and it provides a means of persistence, potential privilege escalation, and bypassing various security controls for prevention, detection, and so on. Now, if you watch the full disclosure email listed all, you'll quickly realize that a lot of legitimate signed binaries for operating systems and trusted third parties, such as security software, are vulnerable to SOH. A lot. On the good side, from the security software perspective, even though it shows up on that list a lot, we don't see it leveraged very commonly. So that's a plus. Of course, it usually just gets disabled, which makes it easier, I guess. Now, there are a lot of talks and articles about SOH from different aspects, but very few address early identification based on ongoing activity. Instead, they focus on after-the-fact forensics, reverse engineering DLLs or executables, and so on. Now, where I work, we leverage endpoint detection and response, or EDR, telemetry to identify and alert on active threats within our customer environments. Now, the concept of using EDR telemetry is what I'm going to focus on today, but not from the perspective of any given platform, nor how we use it specifically. I've tried to keep this generic from that angle and just provide you with methods and concepts that you can use to extract information from whatever data sources you have at your disposal. Now, the most accurate way to identify SOH is based on knowing every legitimate binary, every single legitimate binary on every single system, and the paths that they are expected to launch from, and check every single one of those. Then you combine that with knowing every single legitimate DLL that they are supposed to load by name and path, and check the unexpected binary launch paths to see if any of those DLLs are being loaded as well. Now you back that up a little bit further, earlier in the chain, and you can identify the activity based on the file rights of those legitimate executables and illegitimate DLLs to those unexpected paths. Now, you might think it would be as easy as watching for any file rights of exes or DLLs to those paths, but not so much. All right, so if the best way isn't all that feasible, and if you didn't gather from what I just said that the best way isn't all that feasible, then I did a terrible job of explaining it. But it's not that feasible, okay? So if the best way isn't, at least keep it in the back of your mind. And while you're doing that, focus on the behaviors that may help point to SOH at various levels of the technique. Okay, so let's say that you have a scenario which looks like it might be related to SOH. How can you confirm it? Check out the exes to see if they're legitimate. And remember, they might be Windows system binaries, but often ones that are not commonly used, or other legitimate binaries for other software. Once you've done that, check the DLLs in the same directory. Do any exist that are named the same as known legitimate ones, but don't contain the appropriate signatures or metadata? Or maybe even if you get lucky, they've already been flagged by antivirus engines as malicious. Again, the key aspect here is that the malicious DLL gets loaded from the same path as the exe. If the legitimate DLL of that name is likely to already be in memory, that will get checked first, and then the technique fails. Okay, so I've talked at a very high level about some methods that you might be able to use to identify and validate SOH activity. Next, I'm going to provide some sample logic that you might be able to use to get started. And as I mentioned already, detecting SOH isn't necessarily straightforward, and some of the concepts are fairly broad and may be prone to noise in order to raise up activity. A lot of it depends on the individual environment. Now, these are some rough ideas of generic query logic that I pulled together based on some of the things that we look for to identify SOH. Hopefully, the logic construct is something that you can use to create queries within your own environment if you aren't already looking for these. Again, this is not any specific query language. It's just designed to kind of capture the concepts of what we're looking for. Now, be forewarned, they may be noisy depending on your environment. So don't go full production right from the start. Also, 2 of these will only work if you can reliably collect signature information on binaries. And depending on your data source, this might be challenging, especially if the information is stored in a manifest instead of being embedded in the binary. All of them will probably require further tuning, depending on the individual results you get in your specific scenario and environment. Now, as alluded to before, detecting actual search order hijacking can be challenging, and we continue working on ways to do that better. One of the other ways we've approached it is by building detector logic that's focused on other behavior, which can potentially lead us to or point to SOH. And as a result, we've seen SOH associated with scheduled tasks, process injection, masquerading, use of admin shares, and domain trust discovery, to name just a few. And we're going to look at a couple of examples from real-world activity, not just something that was set up in a lab, not from reversing malicious DLLs or researching specific malware. And so seeing it in this way should provide some clues that we can then watch for as activity unfolds on systems. Now here we have the creation of a scheduled task to launch a legitimate Windows binary, one that's part of BitLocker, from a path under the user profile in app data roaming. So not only do we have a legitimate binary where it shouldn't be, but there's also the persistence mechanism from scheduled task, okay? And it's important to note that most of the binaries that we see used this way are not commonly observed executing, right? They pick something that's unusual, less common, but still trusted. The reason is, as previously mentioned, it's less likely to cause conflicts with DLLs that might already be loaded into memory by another process. Remember that if that legitimate DLL is already in memory, the SOH won't work. It's going to fail because it's going to check memory first before it looks for path. So shortly following the creation of the scheduled task, the executable is written to disk in the referenced path. The Windows command processor did this file write, and if I recall correctly, it copied the BDUI SRV exe from System32 and wrote it here to this path. So that's also a possible detector concept. And we can leverage all these observables in a lather, rinse, repeat sort of scenario to continue improving detection methodologies. Now, at this point, we definitely know that we're looking at SOH being set up. The DLL being written here has a legitimate name, but it's not the actual WTS API 32 DLL, nor is it in the proper and expected path. Now, this one did not succeed in going through all the way, so we didn't see execution, but it is a classic setup for SOH. So, all right, on to another detection. In this one, we have the Windows script host writing a binary under the user profile. Metadata indicates that it's the GNU diffutils binary cmp.exe, but the size is wrong. And OSINT says that it's imitat. It actually kicks off other activity, which goes into the SOH side of things. And we're right back into a situation that's very similar to the previous detection. A copy of the Windows fax and scan binary is written to disk under the user profile in app data roaming. We're getting ready here, folks. A confirmation received. A legitimately named but completely malicious DLL is written to the same path. It's ready to load. We've got it. It's going. The binary and the DLL are prepped, and now the scheduled task gets set up for execution and persistence. Our WFS binary will be live and in living color in 60 minutes. And here we go, execution of WFS exe. And sure enough, immediately following that execution, the malicious DLL is loaded into memory by WFS. We have, once again, SOH for the win. But it's not all doom and gloom. All we need to do to prevent this is to have all compiled binaries have explicit, fully qualified path references for all DLLs that will be used, including dependent DLLs. That's all. Simple, right? Okay, maybe not. At any rate, good security hygiene can help. Microsoft has some resources that can be leveraged to help mitigate some of that risk, and having solid detection methodologies that balance out signal to noise and catch activity as early as possible can help as well. And so here are some links to more information. If there's time for questions here, that's great. Otherwise, I'll be available in the Discord channel and happy to talk more on the topic. Thank you very much.
There I am. All right. I'm assuming you can all see me. Um, it's been an interesting day. Uh, Thank you all for coming out to BSidesDFW2020. Um, it was, in many ways, it was a year one. We've been doing this for 11 years, but there's a lot of learning curves. Going full virtual, uh, it had a lot of implications and things that we just didn't know what we were getting into originally. So there were some bumps. There were some slight technical difficulties. We apologize for those. We hope you still had a good time, and we hope you come back for the next go round. Before we get into all the usual type stuff, for those of you that are actually local, you're lucky to be in the Metroplex. We have a few groups in the area. There's occasionally something going on, and if you get bored, you might be able to break that random spell once in a while. If you're not local to the area, you know, if things keep going the way they're going, a lot of these groups are doing stuff virtually. You can still join in on the fun. Like I said, we got a little bit going on. Check them out. Next thing, just thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to the folks that helped out. Thank you to the folks that showed up. Thank you to the speakers for their time, contributing content, being willing to share, and the hours of work that went into their individual research and projects. Thank you to the sponsors. Thank you to our Patreons. Just thank you to everyone. I know I'm missing some specific folks, but it is what it is, and thank you to everyone. Again, rundown of our sponsors. Like I said earlier in opening ceremonies, this is a very short list of folks that genuinely, truly wanted to be here and partner with us. We can't do it without them. And once again, thank you for what you do and for supporting the community. And the information that most people are looking forward to, and unfortunately, I didn't get it all collected beforehand, but contest winners, if you were already on Alt Beer's Twitch for the hardware hacking, we had Mitch Chevius won the multimeter in the noob contest. The second competition had no winners, so they had a second noob drawing. Daniel got the Raspberry Pi for that. And for the hacker competition, Pony Lover won that one. In the Prevade CTF, give me 1 second here. Where'd it go? Yeah, we still don't have information on the Prevade CTF. We will post that later. Likewise, with the 0.3 security CTF, do not have that information yet. We will also post that later. Sorry for that. And with that said, short and simple, that's all we got for this year. We've got some things half-baked in the works. Still trying to figure out how to do stuff going forward outside of just an annual event. Now that we've been forced into this virtual thing and we've been through this one time and we know some of the tricks, we might start seeing some more, some possibly maybe not, don't quote me, maybe some monthly events coming forward. If nothing else, definitely some guest spots. So just follow Twitter. And once again, thank you all for coming out. That's all we got. Have a good evening and see you on the flip side.